He's been cleaning your floors while you blocked his scholarship for 7 years.
I'm not questioning your commitment, Dominique. I'm questioning your capacity.
They filed a complaint. Anonymous. 6 months before I graduate.
You are not withdrawing from this program. Not today. Give me 7 days. The numbers aren't adding up, Dominique.
This company posted its strongest quarter in 6 years since my accident. You want to talk numbers, Victor? Let's talk numbers. He wasn't just targeting Isaiah. He's been routing internal R&D data to a competitor for 14 months.
I've had the photograph since the first night. I've been waiting for the right person to...
And he was a janitor who mopped the floors of a building owned by a woman who couldn't walk. She had 3 specialists, 2 lawyers, and a board of directors. He had a mop, 6 months left in physical therapy school, and a promise he had no business making. This is how he kept it. And Isaiah Carter woke up at 4:47 a.m. Not because his alarm went off, because his body had learned. After enough years of early mornings and late nights, sleep stops being rest and starts being a pause between obligations, and 11 seconds on his back, staring at the ceiling. The crack in the paint above the light fixture had been there for 8 months. He kept meaning to fix it. He hadn't fixed it. He got up anyway. The kitchen was small. Everything in the apartment was small. And the coffee maker was older than some of his classmates at Northwestern and complained every morning like it was personally offended by the hour. Isaiah filled the filter, pressed the button, stood there while it worked through its grievances. And outside, Chicago was still dark. It would be dark for another 2 hours. He made 2 cups, one for himself. One he left on the counter with a sticky note, 7:45. Don't be late, you have that quiz. Zara would find it when she woke up. She always did. And 19 years old, first year at DePaul, studying biology because she said she wanted to understand how things worked from the inside out. Isaiah had smiled when she told him that, and then he'd gone to his room and done the math on what her second year was going to cost. He'd taken the night shift the following Monday. That was 3 years ago. She didn't know that part. He hadn't told her. Some things a man carries alone, not because he has to, but because he decides to. Because the weight belongs to him and not to her. Because she had already carried enough. He drank his coffee standing up. He always drank his coffee standing up. And then he put on his coat and went out into the dark. Northwestern's physical therapy program did not care that he'd been awake since before 5. And it didn't care that he would spend that same evening cleaning marble floors on the 47th floor of a building that cost more to construct than some small cities. It cared about anatomy, about neural pathways, and about the mechanics of the human body in the long, difficult process of learning itself again. Isaiah cared about those things too, and more than he'd ever cared about anything he could name. That was the part people missed when they saw the cleaning cart, when they saw the coveralls. They thought they were looking at the whole picture. They weren't even close. He sat in the front row, not to make an impression, and because he didn't want to miss anything. Professor Bernard had been teaching spinal rehabilitation for 30 years and showed no signs of becoming less passionate about it. And he was 58 years old with the bearing of a man who had decided somewhere along the way that information this important deserved to be delivered like it mattered, because it did. And neuroplasticity, he said that morning. Say it back to me. The class said it back again. They said it again. And that word. And, Bernard said, and pointing at no one and everyone. And is the reasons half your future patients are going to walk out of your clinic when the world already decided they wouldn't. And understand it. Because it is the closest thing this field has to a second chance. Isaiah wrote it down. He already knew it. He wrote it down anyway because some things deserve the weight of being recorded. And 6 months left in the program. 6 months until licensed. Until he could stop cleaning other people's offices and start doing the thing he'd spent 4 years building toward. 6 months felt enormous and like nothing at all depending on which direction he was looking. And he looked forward. He always looked forward. The night shift at Hargrove Tower started at 10. Isaiah took the train from Evanston, changed twice, walked 3 blocks in October cold that Chicago manufactured with real commitment. And the building came into view the way it always did, rising against the dark sky like something designed to make a person feel the distance between where they stood and where other people lived. He swiped his badge at the service entrance, took the service elevator, and pressed 47. The 47th floor belonged, in every meaningful sense, to Dominique Hargrove. Her name was on the company, on the building, and on the brass plaque beside the elevator bank that Isaiah passed every night without looking at it because he'd read it enough times to know it by memory. And Hargrove Technologies, founded 12 years ago by a woman who had looked at the tech industry and decided that if no one was offering her a seat, she would build her own table and put her own name on it. And Isaiah knew her, the way anyone in the building knew her name, as something that appeared on every surface, present and abstract at the same time. He had never actually seen her. Most nights, the executive suite was empty by the time he arrived, and most nights, he noticed the light before he turned the corner, a thin line of gold under the corner office door at the far end of the hallway. He stopped, checked his watch, 11:08 p.m., and he stood there for a moment, and weighing it the way he weighed most things not for long, and because long deliberation was a luxury for people with more time, but with full attention. Then he pushed his cart to the door and knocked 3 times, and quiet but deliberate, "Come in." The first thing he registered was the wheelchair. The second thing was her. Dominique Hargrove was 38 years old and looked like someone built specifically for a corner office. Sharp jaw, sharp eyes, and the kind of posture that comes from a lifetime of being told that how you hold yourself tells people everything. She sat behind a desk covered in documents, reading glasses pushed up into her hair, her left hand making a slow, mechanical circle against her temple, and the wheelchair sat beside the desk, not up behind it, parallel to it, like she hadn't fully decided how to integrate it into the version of herself she presented to the world. And 8 months ago, Isaiah knew from the news, Dominique Hargrove had been driving home on the I-290 when a truck ran a red light. Her car hit a concrete divider at 53 miles an hour. The truck driver walked away from it. Dominique had not walked away, and 3 specialists had reviewed her case and delivered variations of the same conclusion. And Isaiah looked at her. Not at her face, not yet at her left shoulder. "I can come back later," he said. No, she didn't look up from the document. "I'll be here all night. Come in." He came in, started at the far corner the way he always did, and bookcases first, then the windowsill, working his way across the room with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned to be invisible in spaces that weren't built for him. But he kept his attention on her left shoulder, because something was wrong with it. The trapezius muscle was contracted, and he could see it through her jacket. The way her left side sat a fraction higher than her right, the angle of her neck compensating for tension that had been building for hours. An incomplete T11 injury would compromise neural signals to the lower body, but the secondary effects above the injury site, and the overcompensation that happened when the rest of the body was working twice as hard to make up for what the lower half couldn't do, and those could be severe. And everything about her posture said nobody was treating them. He watched her reach for a document and wince, barely, the contained kind. The kind a person develops when they've gotten skilled at managing what they show, and the kind that only surfaces when they believe no one is paying attention. He set down his cloth. "Miss Hargrove." She looked up, surprised, like she'd already forgotten he was there. "Your left shoulder," he said, "the trapezius. It's been in spasm for at least 3 hours." And a pause. "Excuse me? I can see the contraction from here. The angle of your neck is compensating. You're probably getting referred pain up into the base of your skull, which is why you've been rubbing your temple since I walked in." And she looked at him the way people look at something unexpected, not hostile, not open, something more careful than both. "And who are you?" she said. "Isaiah Carter. I clean this floor. You clean this floor." And she repeated it with the flatness of someone cataloging information they hadn't requested. "And that makes you qualified to assess my shoulder because I'm a physical therapy student at Northwestern. 6 months from graduating." 6 months from graduating, she said. "Yes, and so not yet graduated. Not yet." A silence that had shape to it. She was thinking. He could see her doing it, the shift behind her eyes as she decided whether to dismiss him or hear him out. "And that's either very impressive or very presumptuous," she said. "I haven't decided which?" "Probably both," he said. "Can I tell you something else? I have a feeling you will regardless. your T11 incomplete injury, and the secondary dysfunction in your upper body is a direct result of how your body is compensating for what it can't do below the injury. You're doing the work of your entire body with everything above your waist. And if no one is treating the secondary effects, you're building a second injury on top of the first one. And silence, real silence this time. She put down her pen. You said that from across the room, she said. Yes, after watching me for 4 minutes, closer to 7. She looked at him for a long time. He did not look away. And he'd stood in situations considerably more uncomfortable than being studied by a woman who could end his employment with one call. He waited without filling the space, which was its own kind of answer. And what tough spinal injury did I sustain, she said. Not a question, testing him. T11 incomplete. Incomplete means some neural pathways survived. The question is which ones and how viable they are. And that's not a question an MRI fully answers, because the MRI documents structural damage. It doesn't map all functional pathways. Those can look very different from the structural picture. She was quiet. 3 specialists, she said. I know, and the best neurological surgeons in Illinois. Surgeons are exceptional at acute intervention, he said. And recovery is a different discipline. Those aren't always the same people. And you think you're that person. He said simply, no build-up. I'm going to help you walk again. The room held very still after that. Outside, 47 floors below, Chicago did what it always did. And moved, demanded, didn't wait for anyone. Dominique Hargrove's face didn't change immediately. She'd been in too many rooms where revealing something too soon had cost her. But something moved behind her eyes, and something she didn't close down fast enough. You're serious, she said. I don't make offers I don't intend to keep. You're a janitor. I'm a physical therapy student who also works nights as a janitor. The distinction matters to you. Yes, she held his gaze, he held hers, and the city hummed below them. I have a board meeting in 7 hours, she said. I know, I'll let you get back to it. He picked up his cloth and moved to the next section of the room. Mr. Carter, he stopped. Come back tomorrow evening, she said. If you have something real to say, I'll give you time to say it. He nodded once. Good night, Miss Hargrove. He finished the floor and left, and he didn't let himself think about it until he was outside, walking the 3 blocks toward the train in the October cold, his breath making small temporary shapes in the dark air. Then he allowed himself one thought, and she didn't say no. He almost missed it completely. That was the thing. He hadn't been looking for anything. He'd been doing his job, moving through the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to work without drawing attention, not looking at screens, and not reading documents. But when he moved to wipe down the credenza on the left side of her desk, the monitor had been positioned at an angle that put it directly in his sight line, and an email, open. The subject line clear before he could redirect his eyes, Hargrove medical schedule updated per request, and the recipient address, which was not an internal Hargrove Technologies address. Not even close. He stood still for 2 seconds, and then he took out his phone, held it at the right angle, and took a photograph. He didn't know what it meant yet. Maybe something. Maybe nothing. He had learned in the field that the things you don't understand are exactly the things you document first and interpret later. And you gather the evidence when it's available. You figure out what it means when you have more information. He put his phone away, continued cleaning, said nothing, and he told Zara about the conversation the way he told her most things briefly, standing over the kitchen counter at midnight eating leftover rice, because neither of them had the energy to sit down properly after the hours they'd both put in. And the CEO of the whole company, Zara said. Yes, and you told her you'd help her walk, and yes. Zara pointed her fork at him. And she didn't throw you out. She told me to come back. Huh. She studied him over her food. You know, most people would be terrified right now. I'm not most people. No, she said, going back to eating. You really aren't. He washed his fork and set it in the rack. She's in pain, he said, more than she's letting on. Someone should be addressing it. And Zara was quiet for a moment. Someone like you, she said, someone like me. He went to bed. He did not sleep much, not because he was nervous. And he had been in situations that actually warranted nerves procedures in field conditions, resource shortages where mistakes had real costs, the specific sustained fear of not knowing whether someone under his care was going to make it through the next hour. A meeting with a CEO in a building he'd been cleaning for 3 years did not register on that scale. But it wasn't really about the meeting, it was about the case. He sat at the kitchen table after midnight with his laptop and his textbooks and went back through everything he knew about T11 incomplete injuries, the variables, the outcome ranges, and the factors that pushed recovery in one direction or another. The research from the last 5 years specifically, because this field moved and what had been the established ceiling in 2019 was not the established ceiling now. Neuroplasticity and the brain's capacity to form new pathways around damage, to reroute around what had been broken and find another way through. It was not guaranteed. He had never told Dominique it was guaranteed. And he had told her there was potential, and there was a difference between those two things that mattered enormously. It was the difference between genuine hope and the kind that destroys people. And Isaiah Carter had spent enough time in enough recovery rooms to know which was which, and never confuse them. And Zara appeared in the doorway around 12:30, oversized sweatshirt, the expression of someone who'd woken up and found a light on. "You're still at it," she said. "Go back to sleep." She ignored him, got a glass of water, and leaned against the counter the way she'd been leaning against counters in his kitchen since she was 8 years old. "Isaiah." He looked up. "You've already decided," she said, not accusing, just observing. "You decided in that office. That's why you're not sleeping. And you're not figuring out whether to do it. You're making sure you haven't missed anything. I'm reviewing the literature." "You know the literature." She pushed off the counter. "That's not reviewing, that's making sure. Because when you do something, you do it without holes." And she moved toward the hallway. "That's not nerves, that's just you." She went back to her room. He sat there for another hour. Then he closed the laptop and went to sleep. And Renee Okafor had worked for Dominique Hargrove for 9 years and had developed over that time something close to a second sense for what her employer was actually thinking versus what she was presenting. The slight tension along the jaw that meant a meeting had gone wrong, and the way she held her coffee when a decision was forming that she hadn't spoken aloud yet. The particular silence that fell when she was working through something she wasn't ready to share. And when Dominique walked in the next morning and said, "I need you to find out everything about a man named Isaiah Carter," Renee recognized the register immediately, and it was the voice she used when something had caught her in a way she hadn't expected, and she wasn't yet sure what to do about it. "How thorough?" Renee asked. "Completely. Timeline today." The file was on Renee's desk by 2 in the afternoon. Isaiah Carter, age 30, and born and raised in Chicago's Englewood neighborhood. His mother, Diane Carter, had died of ovarian cancer 4 years ago, after a first diagnosis when Isaiah was 23 and Zara was 11. Isaiah had assumed legal guardianship at that time and maintained it, and he had put himself through the Army first and served 6 years and specialized in trauma rehabilitation and received commendations, an honorable discharge. Then Northwestern, Doctor of Physical Therapy program, GPA 3.8. In the top 5% of his cohort every semester, and 1 professor, and in a recommendation letter on file, and had written, "And the most clinically intuitive student I have taught in 22 years of this program, and night maintenance at Hargrove Tower for 3 years. The math on his schedule was not subtle once you saw it laid out. Full days at Northwestern, evenings at Hargrove Tower, Zara's tuition bills running alongside his own. No complaints, no incidents." And Renee set that file on Dominique's desk. Then she set a second page beside it, and separately, because it was the piece that didn't fit, and she wanted Dominique to see it in the context of the rest. "There's something that needs to be flagged," she said. Dominique looked at the second page. A disciplinary record, filed with Northwestern in 2019, alleging a protocol violation during a clinical rotation. "My read," Renee said carefully, "is that it doesn't belong with the rest of this file. His clinical supervisors from that same semester gave him evaluations they're exceptional, Dominique, and you don't produce that kind of documentation about someone you're simultaneously filing a violation against." Dominique studied the page. "I want to know where this came from," she said. "Who filed it? When it was actually entered into the system. I'll find out. Today," and it took Renee until 6 in the evening, working through channels she'd built over 9 years of exactly this kind of careful work. And she came back into Dominique's office, closed the door, and stood with the expression of someone who has found something and is deciding the most accurate way to present it. and the record was entered into Northwestern's system 7 weeks ago, she said. Not in 2019. September of this year, Dominique went very still. Someone put it in retroactively, Renee continued, and I spoke directly with the professor who would have authorized any disciplinary action in that period. He's been with the program for 22 years. He said, and I'm quoting him exactly, "I signed every document that ever touched Isaiah Carter's file. That record is not mine, and I did not file it, and I never would have." And the office was quiet. Dominique looked out the window. Chicago at dusk, the lake going gray and silver and then dark. "Someone wanted me to read that file," she said, "and decide not to trust him before I had any real reason not to." "That's what it looks like," Renee said, "and before he had any real opportunity to show what he could do." Yes, Dominique was quiet for a moment, thinking through the shape of it. "And schedule a call with that professor for tomorrow morning," she said. "And clear my 6 a.m. For how long? An hour. Get Dr. Walters available as well. I want her present." Renee noted it, started toward the door. "Renee," she stopped. "And book the gym under general building maintenance," Dominique said. "Not under my calendar." Renee allowed herself the smallest shift in expression. "Of course," she said. Isaiah got the call from Renee at 9:20 that night, already in the service elevator heading up, and he listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "I'll be there at 6, she said. "Dr. Walters will be present for clinical oversight." "That's the right call," he said. "I would have requested the same." A pause on the line, and "Mr. Carter," and Renee said, and then something careful had entered her voice. "And she's spoken with Professor Bernard, and she knows the disciplinary record is false." "All right," he said. "I thought you should know she knows." "Thank you, Renee, and good night." He pocketed the phone. The elevator reached 47. He pulled the card out and stood in the empty hallway for a moment. The corner office was dark tonight. He started cleaning. Dr. Simone Walters arrived at 5:50 and was not particularly warm about it, and 50 years old, 22 years in neurology, 47 spinal cord injury patients by her own count, treated across the range of severity. She did not underestimate her own expertise and had no interest in pretending otherwise. And she had agreed to come this morning because Dominique Hargrove had asked her, and there were very few people whose requests she found genuinely difficult to decline. She was standing in the gym on the 47th floor when Isaiah arrived at exactly 6. She looked at him, and he looked at her. "You're the student," she said. "Isaiah Carter." "Yes, ma'am." "Simone Walters." No handshake. "My role here is observation and intervention if necessary. I want that understood clearly." "And that's exactly the right role," he said. "I wouldn't want anything less." That caught her. She'd been ready for defensiveness. She didn't get it. Dominique arrived 2 minutes later. Renee brought her to the doorway and stepped back. And Dominique looked at the room, the gym she'd installed 2 years ago and hadn't been able to use since the accident, and then at Isaiah. "You're on time," she said. "Always." "Good." She wheeled in. "What does this involve?" "And assessment only, today. I need to understand where you are before I can tell you where we can go. Sensation levels, muscle response, range of motion above and below the injury site. Nothing you haven't had done before. Then, why will this be different?" He said it directly. "And because I'm looking for what's still working, not documenting what isn't." She held his gaze. Then she looked at Dr. Walters. Dr. Walters said nothing, but her arms, which had been crossed since she arrived, lowered slightly. "And all right," Dominique said. "Start." Isaiah worked the way he'd been trained, which was methodically and without performance. Upper body first, and the secondary tension patterns he'd identified the previous night, the compensation in her neck and shoulders, the range of motion deficits that had developed not from the injury itself, but from how her body had been working around it. And his hands were careful, the way good clinical practice is careful, attentive and deliberate, aware at every moment that this was a person in front of him, and not a problem to be solved. And Dr. Walters stood to the side. She started writing things down around the 8-minute mark. "When did you start noticing differential sensation in your left side?" he asked. 3 weeks ago. "Maybe 4. You told your medical team?" A pause, and I assumed it wasn't clinically significant. He filed that away without comment. He moved to the lower body. Documented what he found. The left-right differential was more pronounced than anything in her file had indicated. The left side was showing more response, and nobody had caught it because nobody had been testing with sufficient granularity. I want to try something, he said. I'm going to ask you to do something small. Don't try to force it. Don't try to do more than I describe. Just listen to the instruction and respond to it. And I'm not good at not forcing things. I know. Try anyway. She looked at him, then almost smiled. Close your eyes, he said. Take your attention to your right foot. And not your legs, your foot specifically, the ball of it. She closed her eyes. The gym went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something is actually happening in them. Shift your weight toward it, he said quietly. Just the intention. Don't push, nothing for a moment. Then, and a movement. Small, unambiguous, real. Dominique's eyes came open. Did you? I saw it. His voice stayed level. Controlled, but something had shifted in how he was standing, the stillness of someone who has just confirmed what they'd already suspected, and that was genuine neural activity. Your nervous system has more intact pathways than any assessment you've had has found. Dominique stared at her own foot. Dr. Walters stepped forward from her corner. Do it again, she said. She was speaking to Isaiah now, and not monitoring the room, engaging with it. He guided Dominique through the movement a second time, the same response. Slightly stronger. Dr. Walters was quiet for a long moment, and, given the MRI findings from 8 months ago, she said carefully, that response is not consistent with what the structural imaging showed, and the MRI maps structural damage, Isaiah said. It doesn't capture all functional pathways. The two pictures can look very different. I am aware of what an MRI does and does not capture, Mr. Carter. I know you are, he said, and no apology, no backing down, just the same steady register. I'm saying the functional picture here is more complex than the structural one, and that gap is where the work is. She looked at him. Something was happening in Dr. and Walter's expression that she didn't try to conceal. Not agreement, not yet, but the specific look of a clinician who has encountered something that is going to require further thought. Dominique looked between them. What does this mean? She said. Isaiah turned to her. And it means there's a pathway, he said. Right now it's dormant. Underused. Think of a road that hasn't had traffic in 8 months. It's overgrown. The signs are hard to read, but the road is there, and it exists. He paused. Physical therapy doesn't build new roads. It clears the ones that are already there. Slowly, consistently, with no promises about the final destination. But Miss Hargrove, he waited until she was fully with him. The road is there, and that's what this morning told us. She looked at him for a long time. Outside, Chicago had come fully awake. The morning light had moved from gray to white. 47 floors below, the city was doing what it always did, and not waiting. When do we start? She asked. We already did, he said. He was waiting for the service elevator when Dr. Walters appeared beside him. He hadn't heard her coming, Mr. Carter. Dr. Walters, and she stood beside him, not quite facing him, looking at the elevator doors. The left side differential, she said. How long to identify it? About 3 minutes. It's not in any of her records. No, because no one was looking for it specifically, and that's one explanation. She was quiet. I want weekly reports, she said, detailed. Methodology, response data, any change in either direction. You bring nothing new into a session without running it by me first. Agreed. And if at any point I assess that this is causing harm rather than producing benefit, we stop immediately, he said. That's not negotiable on my end either. The elevator arrived. He stepped in. She didn't move, Mr. Carter. He held the door. What you found this morning, and she said. And there was something in her voice that wasn't quite what had been there before, and is going to bother me for the rest of the day. Anne. Why? Because I reviewed her case myself 8 months ago. At the initial presentation, a pause. I should have found it. Isaiah looked at her steadily. You were documenting what the injury had taken, he said. I was looking for what it hadn't, and the doors closed. He rode down 47 floors. He walked out into the October morning and did not let himself look too far ahead. That was the discipline. You take the step in front of you. You don't stand at the bottom of the road and try to see where it ends. And you clear the next foot of it, then the next. That was the work. He put his hands in his pockets and walked toward the train. He had class in 2 hours, and he was going to be on time. He always was. The first month was about learning each other's edges. Not in the way people describe in stories. No single morning where everything shifted. No breakthrough with the room suddenly brighter, and both of them changed. And just the slow accumulation of small truths, one session at a time, in the cleared gym on the 47th floor while Chicago moved below them and paid no attention to either of them at all. And Dominique was not an easy patient. Isaiah had not expected her to be. She pushed when she should have rested, and she created internal targets she hadn't told him about, and then held herself accountable to them in silence, which meant he could see the punishment without knowing the standard. And she had a way of treating pain as information to be overridden rather than read, which was the exact opposite of what recovery required. And every time he redirected her on it, she would go quiet in the particular way of someone who is accepting a correction while simultaneously filing a grievance about it. And he let her file it. Grievance was energy. He'd learned that in the field. The patients who got angry at their limitations recovered faster than the ones who reached accommodation with them too early. The anger meant they still believed something different was possible, and that belief was the most important clinical tool he had, and he wasn't going to do anything to soften it. Left side, he said one morning, 3 weeks in. You're compensating again. I'm not compensating, and I'm pushing. They feel the same from inside. They don't look the same from here. He moved to adjust her position, one hand at her shoulder, the other at the angle of her hip. More effort in the wrong direction doesn't close the distance, and just tires you out before you get there. She stopped, took a breath. Say that again, she said. Which part? More effort in the wrong direction. He waited. I've been doing that, she said, and not to him specifically. More like something being acknowledged out loud for the first time. 8 months. That's exactly what I've been doing. He didn't say anything. Some realizations need a moment to settle before someone else's voice gets added to them. She repositioned and did the exercise again. Slower, attending to the direction rather than the intensity. The result was measurable. He wrote it down. Dr. Walters had stopped prefacing her session reviews with qualifiers somewhere around week 2, and by week 4 she was asking questions that went past monitoring and into genuine engagement with the methodology. And by week 5, she was showing up to sessions she hadn't been scheduled for, arriving quietly and taking her position in the corner without announcement, staying after to go over his notes with the focused attention of someone who had found something worth her time. And Isaiah didn't acknowledge the change directly. He just continued doing the work. The coffee started sometime in the 5th week. And not as a gesture, not as anything requiring acknowledgement or comment. Isaiah arrived one morning to find 2 cups on the small table near the window, one already in Dominique's hand, one waiting. She didn't explain it, he didn't ask, and he took it and drank it standing up, which was how he always drank coffee, and she noticed. You always, she said. Old habit. Military, kitchen too small to eat in comfortably. She looked at him over her cup, and then looked out at the city. November had arrived and the lake had gone the color of pewter. The trees along Michigan Avenue had dropped everything. Do you like Chicago? She asked. It's home. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed, but it's not enough. She held her cup. And I grew up in South Shore, she said. My father drove a city bus for 31 years. My mother taught 4th grade. She said it without effect, neither proud nor apologetic, and just accurate. Neither of them ever came into a building like this as anything other than a visitor's. And now your name is on it. Now my name is on it. The kind of statement that carries its full weight without needing decoration. 12 years and the things those years cost. And it took more than I expected, and I wouldn't do most of it differently, which tells you something about the kind of person I am. What would you do differently? She thought about it. Actually thought, which was something he'd noticed about her. She didn't perform consideration. She enacted it. The difference was visible. I would have made time for things I kept deciding could wait, she said finally. And I was very clear on what I was building. I was less clear on what I was not building while I was building it. He didn't respond to that. Some things don't need a response. They need a person in the room to receive them without deflecting. And session, she said, setting down her cup. Session, he agreed. Zara showed up on a Thursday, not by plan or not by a plan anyone had told Isaiah about. And his car had made the sound that cars in his price range make when they're deciding to become expensive, and Zara had offered to drop his forgotten notes on her way to campus. She'd cleared it with Renee. She had not cleared it with Isaiah, and he was in the middle of a session when he heard voices in the hallway, and Renee's voice, and another one he recognized without needing to see, younger, and with the particular energy of someone who'd been told to leave something at the front desk and had made an independent assessment of that instruction. and the door opened. Zara came in, looked at the room, at Isaiah, and at Dominique in the center of the space, gripping the parallel bars with the absolute concentration of someone for whom every degree of effort is a negotiation between what the body will do and what the mind is insisting on. "And I brought your notes," Zara said to Isaiah. "I see that," Isaiah said. Renee said I could just fine. He held out his hand, but Dominique had turned. They looked at each other, Dominique and Zara, for a moment. Then Zara said, "Are you the one Isaiah's helping?" "And I am," Dominique said. Her voice had shifted. The boardroom register had stepped back from it slightly, which Isaiah noted and stored. "Do your legs hurt?" Isaiah closed his eyes briefly. "And sometimes," Dominique said. "Isaiah always says pain is the body trying to say something," Zara said. "He says the problem is most people are trying to make it be quiet instead of figuring out what it's saying. He told me something similar. He says it because it's true." And Zara glanced at her brother, then back. "He said it to me after our mom died. I was angry all the time, and I didn't understand why, and he said the anger was just the pain talking, and I needed to learn to hear it." And a pause. It took a while, but he was right. The room was very still. Isaiah kept his expression where it was. Zara had never learned to calculate her words before she said them, and at 19 had stopped apologizing for that. And he had come to understand that it was not a flaw. It was just a different way of being honest, and the world needed more of it, not less. Dominique looked at Zara for a moment, and then at Isaiah. Something had moved in her face. She didn't try to hide it, which was unusual for her, and which he registered and filed without comment. "I have a 9 o'clock, Zara said. She handed Isaiah the notes, started back toward the door, and then stopped and looked at Dominique one more time. "You're going to be okay, by the way. He doesn't give up on people. It's kind of annoying sometimes, honestly. A beat. But it's the good kind of annoying." And she left. The door swung closed. Dominique faced forward again. "Your sister," she said. "Yes, she is." He moved back into position. "Ready?" Dominique put her hands on the bars. "Ready," she said. And Renee found the document on a Tuesday afternoon in November and brought it to Dominique before she let herself think too long about whether she should. She came in with a folder and set it on the desk without explanation, and Dominique opened it. Board Committee Records from 2017. A scholarship review meeting, properly archived, and therefore findable if you knew what you were looking for and had the access to go looking. And Victor Ashford had personally drafted and presented the committee's recommendation to deny a scholarship application to a candidate named Isaiah Carter. The stated rationale: insufficient demonstrated leadership potential for a candidate of this background. And Dominique read it twice. That phrase. Of this background. The kind of language that was designed to mean everything while admitting nothing, and the kind that had been used against people who looked like her, like Isaiah, like anyone who had ever tried to walk through a door and been told the door wasn't meant for them. "How did you find this?" she asked. "And after we found the false disciplinary record, I started pulling connected threads," Renee said. "This was behind one of them." Dominique set the page down. "He's been in this building for 3 years," she said quietly. "And cleaning the floors of a building where the man who blocked his scholarship holds a board seat." And Renee said nothing. "Does he know?" "As far as I can find, no." Dominique sat with that. She told Isaiah the next morning, not at the start of the session, and midway through, when the early cold of the hour had worn off, and the work had found its rhythm, and the room had settled into the particular atmosphere it developed when both of them were fully present in it. She put the copy of the document on the table beside them. "And I need you to read this," she said. He read it. She watched his face do what his face did when he was holding something large, which was almost nothing, and a stillness that was not the absence of feeling but the opposite, a person containing something with deliberate care so it didn't break anything around it. 3 minutes. He set the paper down, stood up. "Ready?" he said. Dominique stared at him. "Isaiah, and 40 minutes left in this session. And I just showed you that Victor I heard you." His voice was even, clear, every word. He moved back to his position. "I'm going to sit with what to do about it, but not during the session. This session is yours." She didn't move. "And how are you not?" "Because I know what happens when I let it take over," he said. "I've been that angry before, the kind that fills the whole room, and I know what it costs." And he looked at her directly. "That information has been true for 7 years. It'll still be true in 40 minutes. Come on." She looked at him for a long moment, then she got up. And in those 40 minutes of careful, and incremental, and difficult work, and with the November light coming flat through the high windows, and the city carrying on its enormous business below, and Dominique Hargrove understood something about Isaiah Carter that no file had told her, and no background check had found, and he was not unaffected by any of this. He was disciplined about it. And those were entirely different things, and the difference mattered more than she had words for. Victor moved in November, and the way people like Victor Ashford move not directly, not with anything traceable back to a single decision or statement, but with the patience of someone who has spent decades understanding how institutional damage gets done. Not through confrontations, and through conditions, through the careful arrangement of circumstances that push others toward doing the work for you. And a financial news outlet ran a piece. Unnamed sources. Questions about leadership stability at Hargrove Technologies, the CEO's ongoing medical situation, her apparent reliance on unorthodox treatment administered by non-credentialed personnel. Isaiah was not named, and he didn't need to be. The stock dropped 11% by close. Victor requested an emergency board meeting. He arrived with the measured calm of someone who had prepared for this and was not going to waste the preparation. He did not raise his voice, and he did not make accusations. He asked questions. Was the board confident that current leadership was providing adequate governance oversight? Were there risk considerations associated with the CEO's personal circumstances that had not been fully evaluated? And was it appropriate for decisions of this magnitude to be made during a period of significant personal transition? Dominique sat at the head of the table, heard all of it. Then she said, the company posted its strongest quarter in 6 years during the period since my accident, and I'm happy to go through the numbers if numbers are what concerns you. If something else is the concern, Victor, I'd suggest saying it directly. Victor smiled the smile of a man who has been doing this long enough to know that patience is its own kind of pressure. And no one is questioning your commitment, Dominique, he said. We're asking about capacity, my capacity, she said. In a difficult period, I am making better decisions than I have made at any point in this company's history, she said. And quiet, without heat, without performance. Everyone in this room who has been paying attention knows that. So let's move on. She held the vote on 3 pending acquisitions that afternoon. All 3 passed. Victor voted against one. He was the only one. 6 step, and that was the number that changed everything and broke everything on the same night, in the same room, within the same 10 minutes. December, week 11, Dr. Walters present, Renee in the hallway. Dominique had been counting, and Isaiah didn't know this. And she hadn't told him about the private arithmetic she'd been doing, and the nightly calculations about when her muscle response would be reliable enough, and when the left side differential would close enough, and when she would be ready to try something she hadn't told him she was working toward. And she stood at the far end of the parallel bars, looked at the open floor between her and the wall. Let go, she said. Isaiah was behind her, hands not quite making contact. And your left side, I know my left side, let go. He let go, she stood, 1 second, 2, 5, stable. Then she moved. Step 1, right leg, controlled, real. Step 2, and left leg, slower, and a fraction behind. And, but present. And, step 3, Dr. Walters had stopped writing. Step 5, Dominique's breathing changed, shallower, the body allocating everything available to the task of staying upright and moving forward. Step 6, her left knee buckled. Not a collapse, a failure of signal, and the neural pathway arriving a fraction of a second, too late to hold the weight above it. She went down, Isaiah was already moving, and he caught her before it became a fall, and both hands on her arms, and going down with her to the floor in a controlled descent, and absorbing the landing, and keeping her from the impact she would otherwise have taken, and they ended up on the floor together. She was breathing hard. He was already checking her, hands and eyes moving through the assessment automatically, the way it worked when the training ran deep enough. And talk to me, he said.
I'm fine.
Dominique, I said I'm fine. Her voice cracked on the last word. She was not fine, not because of the fall. The fall had been managed. There would be bruising. There would be soreness. Dr. Walters was all crossing the room, and she wasn't fine because she had been 6 steps away from something real, something she had been working toward in private for weeks, and the floor had come up to take it back, and she was shaking, not from pain, 6 there on the floor, not getting up, not moving her until she was ready to be moved. You just walked 6 steps that didn't exist 3 months ago. I fell. After 6 steps, Isaiah, Dominique, he waited, and until she looked at him. 6 steps that 3 physicians told you were not coming. You fell after them. Not before. She looked at the floor between them, and my left side, she said. Lo. Your left side is the work we do next, he said. Tonight told us exactly what we need to know. Tonight was not a setback. Tonight was information. And Dr. Walters knelt beside them and began her assessment in the careful, methodical voice as someone who had stopped treating this as a situation she was monitoring from the outside. And it was there, on the gym floor with December pressing against the high windows, that Dominique Argrove said something she had not said out loud since the night of the accident. And I'm scared, she said. She said it to the floor, not specifically to him, but he was there. I know he don't do scared. Everyone does scared. He said the question is just what you do next. She was admitted for observation that night, not because of the fall itself, and because of what the fall triggered, and the muscle contraction that set in during the hours after, and the body's overreaction to the sustained exertion, and the risk of compounding the injury if it wasn't managed. And Dr. Walters made the call. Dominique didn't argue, which said more than words. Isaiah stayed. He didn't announce it. He simply didn't leave. And he found the chair in the corner of her hospital room and sat in it. And Renee brought him coffee at some point without being asked. And the city outside the window went from night through the colorless gray before dawn. Dominique slept in intervals, and when she woke at 2 in the morning and found him still in the corner, she didn't say anything for a moment, and she looked at him with the unguarded expression of a person who hasn't yet had time to reassemble their usual presentation. You should go home, she said. I'm all right, Isaiah. Zara has a key. She knows where everything is. A pause. You texted her? Before we left. And what did you say? That I was with someone who needed help and I'd be late. She was quiet, looking at the ceiling. Someone who needed help, she said. And yes, is that what I am to you? He looked at her across the dark hospital room. Tonight you're my patient, he said. Tomorrow you're whatever you are. And what is that? He held her gaze. Something I didn't expect, he said. The room was still, and a cart moved past in the hallway outside. Footsteps, then quiet. The scholarship, she said. Not tonight, Isaiah, not tonight, not hard. Just certain. I've been thinking about it since you showed me that paper, and I have things to say about it, but not here and not right now. Tonight is for something else. She accepted that. They were quiet for a while. He's been doing this before you even started working with me, she said eventually. The email forwarding, the false record, and this is his method. He doesn't act directly. He creates the conditions and waits for other people to do it for him. I know. I'm going to handle it, and I know that too. The photograph, she said. The one you took, he didn't move. Renee told me, she said. That you documented what you saw on my monitor, that you've had it. Since then, yes. Why haven't you used it? Because it's not mine to use, he said. And that's your company, Dominique. That's your fight. I'm not going to take it from you. She looked at him, across the room for a long time, and there were people in the world who held things in trust rather than in reserve, who gathered evidence not as leverage but as something to hand over to the right person at the right moment, and who understood that having information about a situation was not the same as having authority over it. She had not encountered many people like that in 12 years of building something in an industry that ran on leverage and timing and the strategic deployment of what you knew, and she was beginning to think she had found one. The morning after she was discharged, the story ran. A different outlet, wider readership. The headline was measured, but the content wasn't. Isaiah read it on his phone on the train. The word janitor appeared 4 times, and there was a quote from an unnamed board source about potential liability and the exploitation of a vulnerable executive. He put his phone in his pocket, looked out the window at Chicago passing. At Northwestern, there was an email from the program administrator waiting for him, and a formal complaint had been filed. Anonymous, alleging unlicensed clinical practice on a private individual without appropriate institutional supervision. A formal inquiry had been opened. He was required to appear before the program ethics board within 5 business days, and he sat in the hallway outside Bernard's office and read the email twice. Then he folded his phone and knocked on the door. Bernard read the complaint printout without rushing, set it down. Victor Ashford, he said. I can't confirm that, and I can. Bernard leaned back. I've seen this kind of filing before. The objective is paperwork, not resolution. The goal is to slow you down, cost you time, make the process itself the punishment. It may do more than that. Isaiah, you're in my supervision record, Isaiah said. And if they open a full inquiry, your name is in it. Your license is in it. 30 years of your license. My license has weathered difficult things before. And Bernard. He reached into his bag, set an envelope on the desk. I wrote the withdrawal last night. Effective immediately, me. It keeps you and the department completely clear. Bernard looked at the envelope, looked at Isaiah. You're not doing this, he said, and I've decided. 7 months from graduation. I know. 4 years of work. I know. Isaiah's voice didn't waver. He had done the accounting. He had looked at the full cost, and he was not pretending it was smaller than it was. And it's still the right call. If this goes badly and you go down with it, that's not something I can live with. And if you leave, I figure out the next step. I've done that before. He paused. I've done that before with less. Bernard was quiet for a long time, and the expression of a man with strong feelings about injustice and a lifetime of discipline in how he expressed them. You taught me something, Isaiah said. And first week, you said the primary obligation of a physical therapist is to do no harm. Harm to the patient, harm to the institution, harm to the profession. He looked at his professor, his teacher, and the man who had written 47 pages of documentation defending him without being asked. I'm not going to harm you, whatever it costs me. Bernard held the envelope. He did not open it. I'm not accepting this today, he said. I'm holding it. And there is a difference. Give me 1 week. Bernard, 7 days. His voice left no room. Let me make some calls, then we talk. Isaiah looked at him, nodded. 7 days, he said. He left the office and walked down the hallway and out into the December cold, and the campus around him, the building he'd come to 4 years ago with a veteran's tuition benefit, and a set of goals he'd mapped out on a legal pad, and the front row of the lecture hall where Bernard had said the word neuroplasticity, and he had written it down even though he already knew it, and he stood on the sidewalk, took a breath. Zara was home. Rent was paid through January. He had savings enough for 2 months if he was careful, 3 if he was disciplined about it, and he was always disciplined. He had done the right thing, and that was the only accounting that ultimately mattered. The only one that didn't change depending on what happened next. He put his hands in his pockets and walked toward the train. He did not look back at the building, and he was very tired, and he did not look back. 3 in the morning found him outside Hargrove Tower. He hadn't planned to come, and he'd taken the long route home without deciding to, and the long route had eventually brought him here, the way certain routes do when you're not paying attention to where you're going, and your feet know something your mind hasn't admitted yet. And he stood on the sidewalk and looked up. 47 floors. The corner office was dark, and he stood there for a while. And then he turned around and went home to an apartment where Zara had left a light on in the kitchen for him, the way she always did when she knew he was coming in late, and a habit she'd had since she was 11 years old, and he had become the person who made sure someone was always coming home. And he sat down at the kitchen table. He did not do anything for a while, and just sat there in the quiet kitchen with the light on, the city outside, the envelope he hadn't delivered yet on the table in front of him. Then he went to bed. He did not call her, not that night, not the following morning, and not for 3 days after he came home from standing outside Hargrove Tower in the dark and sat at the kitchen table and did nothing for a while before going to bed. This was not avoidance, and he understood the difference between avoidance and deliberate stillness, had learned it the hard way, the way most important distinctions get learned. Avoidance was when you didn't call because you were afraid of what the conversation would cost. And stillness was when you didn't call because you needed to be certain of what you were going to say before you said it, and you were not yet certain. And saying the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong moment was its own of damage. And he was being careful. He spent the first day doing what he always did when he needed to think clearly. He cleaned the apartment. He went grocery shopping. He made dinner for Zara, who ate it and watched him with the sideways attention she'd developed over years of reading him accurately, and did not ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. And after dinner, he sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down everything he knew, in the order he knew it, without editorializing. and the complaint was filed. The inquiry was open. He had submitted a withdrawal that Bernard was holding for 7 days. He had no income from the night shift. He had savings for approximately 3 months if he was disciplined. He had a sister with 1 year of tuition left. He had a clinical case that was, by any objective measure, producing results that the established standard of care had failed to produce. He looked at the list for a long time, and then he turned the page and started writing something else. The second day he went to the library, and not the university library, because he wasn't sure of his access status while the inquiry was open, but the public branch on Michigan Avenue, where he'd studied for 2 years before Northwestern's facilities became available to him. And he sat at a table near the window with his laptop and his notes, and he began writing the document that had been taking shape in the back of his mind since the morning doctor. And Walters had said, I should have found it. A clinical report. Not the kind that satisfies an administrative requirement. The kind that documents a truth completely. Full case history from initial assessment through week 11, baseline measurements, and weekly progression data with specific metrics. The left-right differential that no prior assessment had captured. Neurological response patterns over time. Photographs that Dr. Walters had taken at key intervals, rigorous and unambiguous, dated and annotated. And he wrote for 6 hours. He went home and made coffee and wrote for 3 more. And Zara found him at the table at midnight and sat down across from him without being invited and read over his shoulder for several minutes. This is good, she said. It needs to be more than good. It is more than good. She straightened up, looked at him. Isaiah. And whatever happens with the school and the complaint and all of it, she waited until he looked at her. You helped someone. That part is already true. And that part doesn't change based on what they decide. He held her gaze. I know, he said. I just wanted to make sure you knew. She went to bed. He kept writing until 2:30 in the morning, and then he closed the laptop, lined up his notes on the table in the order he'd need them, and went to sleep. On the 4th day, Dominique called. He picked up on the 2nd ring. You went quiet, she said. I needed to think. And, about? What comes next? A pause. Isaiah, what happened with the inquiry? I submitted a withdrawal from the program. The silence that followed had weight, the specific weight of someone absorbing information they had not prepared themselves for. And tell me you didn't do that because of me. I did it because of Bernard, he said. The complaint was constructed to pull him in. I wasn't going to let that happen, Isaiah. It's done, or it's close to done. Bernard is holding the paperwork for a week. I have people who can Dominique. He said her name the way he said it when he needed her to stop and actually hear him, not as a rebuke, just as a signal. I didn't do this so someone else could fix it, and I did it because it was the right call. Let me work the next step. A long pause. What is the next step? And I'm writing something, he said. Give me 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Yes, another pause. He could hear her thinking, which was a specific sound by now, a particular quality of silence. Are you all right? She asked. And not the boardroom version of the question, the one that was really asking about liability and status and operational capacity. The direct version. The one that meant what it said. I'm working on it, he said. That's not an answer, and it's the honest one. She breathed. 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks, he confirmed. He submitted the report to the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation on a Wednesday morning in January, not through a lawyer, not through the university. Directly. And his name on the cover page, his documentation filling 41 pages, Dr. Walters' clinical verification of the supervision structure attached as a formal addendum, and he walked the submission into the licensing board's Chicago office in person and handed it to the intake coordinator across the desk because he needed to know with certainty that it had arrived. And the intake coordinator looked at the cover page, looked at him, looked at the cover page again. I'll make sure this gets to the right desk, she said. Thank you, he said. He walked back out into the January cold, and he had also included, at the end of the submission, a formal request for a secondary investigation. He had attached the photograph he had taken on his first night in Dominique's office, the email forwarded to an external address, the subject line, and the recipient, and a note requesting that the board cross-reference this with the fraudulent disciplinary record that had been retroactively inserted into Northwestern's system in September, the record that Professor Bernard had confirmed he had never filed, and the record that had been intended to reach Dominique Hargrove before Isaiah Carter had any opportunity to demonstrate what he was actually capable of. And he did not name Victor Ashford in the submission. He didn't need to. The evidence pointed where it pointed, and Bernard called him on a Thursday, 10 days after their meeting. "Come in," he said. No preamble, Isaiah went in. Bernard was standing behind his desk, which was unusual. He was a man who sat for everything, and he had a letter in his hand, and he held it out before Isaiah had fully cleared the doorway. Isaiah took it. "Read it." The ethics board had completed its preliminary review of the complaint. In light of the clinical documentation submitted, Dr. and Walter's supervision records confirming the professional oversight structure, the detailed case report, the corroborating evidence that the original disciplinary filing had been fraudulently entered into the system after the fact the complaint had been dismissed, and no finding of misconduct against Isaiah Carter, no finding of improper supervision against Professor Bernard. He read it a second time. Then he sat down without being invited to, in the chair across from Bernard's desk, and held the letter in both hands. "And the reinstatement paperwork is already processed," Bernard said, and he sat down. "They've recognized your clinical documentation as supervised practicum hours, because that is exactly what it was, a supervised clinical case, properly overseen, producing results that have been submitted to the licensing board as a formal case study." And he leaned forward. 7 months. You finish in July," Isaiah held the letter. Outside Bernard's window, January and Evanston was doing what January and Evanston did, gray and serious and unmoved by personal circumstances. "The secondary investigation," Isaiah said. "And did they trace it?" "The IP investigation is still formally open," Bernard said carefully. "But yes, the record insertion has been traced to a workstation. There are additional inquiries underway that are no longer in the licensing board's jurisdiction alone," and they looked at each other. Isaiah thought about a boardroom in 2017, a committee meeting, and a paragraph drafted by a man with no particular knowledge of him, reducing 8 years of work and intention, and getting up at 4:47 in the morning, and carrying what needed to be carried to a single dismissive phrase about insufficient potential. And he thought about the floors of Hargrove Tower, the service elevator, the corner office with the light on underneath the door, and he thought about what those 3 years had cost, and what they had built in him, and whether those two things could ever be fully separated from each other. He decided they couldn't. He decided that was all right. "The 47 pages," Isaiah said. Bernard looked at him. "And you submitted 47 pages," Isaiah said. Bernard waved a hand. "I didn't count them." And this was obviously not true, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. Isaiah stood up, extended his hand. Bernard shook it, held it for a moment. "July," he said. "July," Isaiah said. He walked out of the building into the cold and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, and he did not feel what he had expected to feel, which was relief. What he felt was quieter than that. Some closer to the feeling of setting down something heavy you have been carrying for long enough that you'd stopped noticing the weight, and not euphoria, just a return to level ground. He stood there for a little while, then he called Dominique. She picked up on the first ring. "It's done," he said, a pause that was different from all her other pauses. "Come over," she said. He went, and he told her everything sitting across from her in her office, which still had the same desk and the same view and the same brass nameplate by the door, but felt different to him now than it had the first night he'd walked into it, and smaller, maybe, more human. She listened without interrupting, which was not her default mode, and which told him something about how seriously she was taking it. When he finished, she said, "Victor resigned from the board this morning. He absorbed that. And the securities inquiry," she said. "The external email forwarding wasn't just about my medical schedule. Renee found more. He'd been routing internal R&D data to a competitor's consulting firm for 14 months. The board's legal team is involved now, and this is well past a resignation. That's not mine to follow," Isaiah said. She looked at him. "You're not even a little satisfied," she said. He thought about it honestly. The way she had taught him, she deserved honesty. "I'm satisfied it's not my problem anymore," he said, and she held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "I walked 32 steps yesterday morning." He went still. "Without Dr. Walters present," she said, "without telling anyone. And I got up early, and I went to the gym, and I walked 32 steps, and then I sat down and I called Renee, and I told her not to tell you because I wanted to tell you myself, and he looked at her across the desk. 32, he said. 32, he let out a breath. She smiled. Not the boardroom smile, not the managed, strategic smile of a woman who had spent 12 years knowing that every expression she made in a room was being evaluated. The other one, and the one that had appeared the day Zara showed up unannounced and asked whether her legs hurt and told her she was going to be okay. Monday, he said, and 6 a.m. I'll be there, she said. He walked back to 32 steps being the distance between what had been and what was coming. He was going to be there too, January into February. And the sessions resumed with Dr. Walters present. And the work continued the way the work always continued, which was incrementally and without drama and with a patience that most people found difficult, and Isaiah had spent his whole adult life practicing. But something had changed in the room, and not in the clinical structure, not in the methodology or the protocol or the careful documentation that Dr. Walters maintained with the precision of someone who had moved from oversight into genuine investment. Something in the quality of the silence between them, and in the way the mornings had stopped being purely about the work and had started being about something else as well, something that lived alongside the work without disrupting it. Dominique stopped performing for him somewhere in the 6th week after the sessions resumed, and he noticed it without marking it, the way you notice a sound that has been there a long time finally going quiet. And she stopped holding her spine at the aggressive vertical that broadcast capability and control to everyone in her orbit and started sitting the way a person sits when they are not auditioning. And she stopped ending her answers at the informational boundary and letting the rest fall away, and started occasionally letting the next thing come too. He stopped presenting as purely clinical around the same time, and not that he had ever been dishonest about what he was doing. But there was a version of professionalism he had been maintaining that was also a kind of distance, and one morning he arrived to find 2 cups on the table, and he didn't take his standing at the far window. And he sat down across from her, and they drank their coffee, and talked about something that had nothing to do with her left side differential or her neural response patterns. And he noticed afterward that neither of them had looked at the clock. And tell me something you've never told anyone at work, she said one morning. February, the lake outside the window looking like hammered silver. He thought about it. I applied for the physical therapy program 4 times before I got in, he said. She looked at him. And the first 2 times, I wasn't ready, he said. My test scores were there, but I hadn't figured out what I actually wanted to do in the field yet. I could feel the gap between what I knew and what I understood. And so I didn't get in, and I learned more, and I tried again. A pause. The 3rd time I got in. But Zara was 15, and our mother had just been diagnosed for the 2nd time, and I deferred, and then the deferral window closed and I was back outside. You didn't tell them why? And I told them why. They were sympathetic. The program calendar didn't accommodate sympathy. He held his cup. The 4th time I was 26, and Zara was stable in school. Mom was gone. I had the army behind me, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do and why. And they let me in, he looked at her. 4 times. Most people don't know that. She was quiet for a moment. Why did you tell me? Because you asked, he said. And because I think you need to know that the people who end up where they were supposed to be usually didn't take a straight road to get there. And she looked out at the lake. I've been thinking about what I said in the hospital, she said eventually, about being scared. I remember. I want to be clear that it wasn't only about the fall. She turned her cup in her hands. And I've built everything in my life by being very precise about what I wanted and very deliberate about going after it. I don't know how to want something and not be in control of whether I get it. And you can't control this, he said. Whether I'm worth it, whether it works, whether it breaks. You can only decide if it's worth trying. She was quiet. Is that what you've decided, she said. He looked at her directly. I decided the night you said you were scared, he said. And I've been waiting to say so until you were ready to hear it. She held his gaze for a long moment. I'm ready, she said. And the proposal happened on a Saturday afternoon in February. No reservation, no orchestrated moment. He had decided, after thinking about it with the same thoroughness he brought to decisions that mattered, that orchestrations was not what either of them needed. An orchestration was for people who needed the environment to do some of the work. He was going to do the work himself. Grant Park was nearly empty at 3 in the afternoon, and the lake was enormous and gray in the specific way it got in late winter, and vast and indifferent, and Isaiah had always thought, and more honest than it was in summer when it performed prettiness for the tourists, and he liked it better this way. They had been walking for 20 minutes when he stopped at a bench. He reached into his coat pocket and set the ring on the bench between them. Simple band, small diamond, and he had looked at rings for 2 weeks and chosen this one because it was what he could afford without borrowing anything from anyone, and he was not going to start this by owing a debt he hadn't disclosed. Dominique looked at the ring and looked at him. "I don't have a speech," he said. "I know," she said. "I have one question." "I know that too." He looked at her. She looked at the ring, then at the lake, and then back at him, and her face had the particular quality it got in the early mornings when she had stopped performing and was just present, unguarded in the way that had taken months to see and that he had come to understand was the most accurate version of her. "And I'm difficult," she said. "I know. I work too much, I've noticed. I don't know how to knead people gracefully." "Dominique," he said it simply, "I watched you rebuild the ability to walk from the ground up, and I watched you do it while running a company and managing a board and refusing to let anyone see how much it cost. Difficult is not what concerns me." She was quiet. The lake did what the lake did. "And yes," she said. He picked up the ring, put it on her finger. She looked at it on her hand for a moment, then she looked at him. "I would have said yes 4 months ago," she said. "I know," he said. "I wasn't ready 4 months ago." She looked at him. "You needed to be certain," she said. "And yes, that's the most you thing I've ever heard." He almost smiled. "Yes," he said. They got married in April, and Dominique had known, from the moment she allowed herself to start planning it, that she did not want the kind of wedding her position in the world seemed to require. No corporate attendance, no coverage, no room full of people who were there because of what her name meant, and she wanted a building her father would have recognized. They found one in South Shore, the neighborhood she'd grown up in. A converted community hall with good bones and warm wood floors and light that came through the windows in wide, honest panels in the afternoon. And it had been used for decades by people who celebrated things and needed a room large enough to hold the celebration, and nothing more than that. Zara stood on Dominique's side. No one commented on this. It was simply where she stood. Dominique walked the full length of the aisle, and no chair, no cane, no arm to hold, just the floor beneath her feet and the work of 6 months of mornings and the particular stubbornness that had always been her most essential quality, and Isaiah at the end of it. And he did not speak when she reached him. He held out his hand, and she put her hand in his, and they faced forward. The vows they had written were short because neither of them was interested in performance, and Dominique said, "I spent a long time building things without understanding what building was really for. You showed me. I'm still learning what that means. Thank you for being patient with the pace." Isaiah said, "I showed up one night to do a job, and I didn't expect to find something worth staying for. I'll keep showing up." The officiant pronounced them married. Isaiah kissed his wife. She was standing on her own 2 feet when he did. The Hargrove Carter Rehabilitation Center opened in October, and Isaiah had graduated in July at a ceremony at Northwestern where Bernard sat in the front row and Zara sat 3 seats down from him and cried in the way she had warned Isaiah she was going to cry, which was without apology or containment, and Dominique stood when his name was called. She was the only person standing in the hall. She didn't look around to see whether it was appropriate. She stood because this moment had cost something real, and she was going to be on her feet for it. And he saw her when he crossed the stage. He almost missed his step. He didn't. And the center was on the north side, and a converted clinic space that Dominique had spent 4 months negotiating into existence while Isaiah finished his final semester, and they argued amiably about the layout of the intake area and the specific equipment needs of the main therapy floor. And they had both been right about different things and wrong about different things, and had eventually produced a facility that was better than either of their individual visions, which Isaiah thought probably how collaboration was supposed to work, and the clinical program was rigorous, and built on the methodology he had developed and documented and submitted to the licensing board, expanded now into a full framework that Dr. Walters had co-authored and that Bernard had agreed to affiliate with Northwestern's continuing education program. And it was already being referenced in PT program curricula in 2 states, and there were inquiries from 3 more. Isaiah was not particularly interested in the recognition. He was interested in the work. The access structure was what he had insisted on. Before the name and before the location. Before the equipment lists and the intake protocols and the board structure that Dominique had constructed with the precision of someone who had built a company from nothing and knew exactly which scaffolding mattered, and no one would be turned away because they couldn't pay. The funding model was not simple, and grants, a sliding scale structure for those who could contribute, and the Hargrove Technologies Charitable Foundation, and a small set of corporate sponsors who had been vetted with more rigor than most people applied to business partnerships. And because the access guarantee was not negotiable, and any sponsor who couldn't understand that was not a sponsor they needed, and the opening was attended by the people who had been in the room for the whole of it, and Renee, who had shown up every day for 9 years and showed no signs of stopping, and Dr. Walters, who had arrived that first morning as a skeptic and had become something more accurately described as a colleague and had never fully acknowledged the transition which Isaiah respected. Bernard, who made a speech that was too long and exactly right, and Zara, who had started her 2nd year at DePaul and brought her boyfriend, a quiet young man named Andre, who was visibly aware that he was being assessed and doing his best. And Isaiah stood near the entrance in the late afternoon and watched people move through the space he had spent 4 years and 1 very long winter building toward. He felt for a moment the full distance between the service elevator at Hargrove Tower and here, and the distance between 4:47 in the morning and this afternoon. Everything that had been carried across that distance, and everything that had been built from it. Dominique appeared beside him. She didn't say anything. She stood next to him and looked at the room, and he said 32 steps. She turned to look at him. "The morning you called me," he said, "you'd walked 32 steps. That's where we were in February." She looked back at the room, and now, he said, she was quiet for a moment, and now she said, that was enough. And Devonte Webb arrived on a Monday morning in November, 6 weeks after the center opened. 24 years old, he had served with the Army's 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, and a training accident 14 months earlier had compressed his T10 vertebra, leaving him with sensation in his thighs and severely limited signal below the knee. And he had completed 2 rounds of conventional rehabilitation and made early progress and plateaued, and had been told with the well-intentioned finality of the conventional medical model that he had likely reached his functional ceiling, and he came in on a manual wheelchair. He had the posture of someone who had spent his entire life in a body that performed, and was still in the process of understanding what it meant that the terms of that had changed. And Isaiah met him in the intake room. They sat across from each other. "Tell me what they told you," Isaiah said. Devonte looked at him steadily. "They told me I'm probably not walking unassisted." "What do you think?" A pause. "I think they measured what they could see," Devonte said, "and I'm not sure they saw everything there is." Isaiah looked at him for a moment. "No," he said, "they probably didn't." He opened the intake folder. "And let's start from the beginning. 5 months. That was the shape of it, though the shape only became clear in retrospect, the way these things do. In real time, it was individual sessions, individual mornings, and individual moments of incremental change that were sometimes visible and sometimes not, and the job was to keep providing the input and trust that the work was accumulating even when the evidence was thin. Devonte worked hard, and not in the way of someone performing effort for an audience, and in the private way, the early and late way, the last to leave the therapy floor, because there was still time for one more set way. Isaiah recognized it without remarking on it. It looked like something he knew well, and Dr. Walters assessed Devonte at the 8-week mark and at the 16-week mark, and adjusted the protocol both times with the specificity of someone who had stopped seeing this kind of case as falling outside established parameters, and started seeing it as requiring a more careful set of parameters. The graduation ceremony for the center's first patient cohort happened on a Thursday in March. and 8 patients, different injuries, different entry points, different places on the recovery arc. Not all of them were walking. Isaiah had been clear from the first week the center opened that walking was not the only measure. It had never been the only measure, and regained sensation was a measure. Reduced pain was a measure, and the ability to do something that had not been possible at intake, and to transfer independently, and to manage a daily routine with less assistance, and to move through the world in a way that was more their own than it had been, and that was a measure. And recovery was not one thing, it had never been one thing. But Devonte Webb walked, and 18 steps across the therapy floor, and his arms out slightly at his sides for balance, and nothing else, no bars, and no support, and just his legs and his nervous system, and 5 months of mornings that had accumulated in the dark into this one visible moment. And his mother was in the front row. She made a sound that was not a word when he reached the far wall and turned around, and Isaiah stood at the side of the room. He did not look away. And after the families had gathered their things, and the staff had cleaned up, and the last car had left the parking lot, Isaiah was in the main therapy room checking the equipment for the morning sessions when he heard footsteps in the hallway. Patricia Webb appeared in the doorway, and he recognized her from the ceremony. 60 or so, a good coat, the posture of someone who had been waiting for something, and had finally arrived at the moment of it, and she came in. "Mr. Carter," she said. "Mrs. Webb." She stopped a few feet from him. She held herself with the particular composure of someone who has prepared carefully for a conversation and is not going to waste the preparation. "My husband was Raymond Webb," she said, "and he passed in August. Before he died, he talked about a decision he'd made years ago. A scholarship committee. A young man he'd voted against." She held his gaze without flinching, and he used the same words that were in the committee record. He knew them because he'd written them, and he knew they were wrong. Isaiah stood very still. "He wanted to apologize," she said. "He didn't get the chance. I'm saying it for him." The therapy floor was quiet around them, and the equipment in its place, the charts on the wall. The room that had been 5 hours earlier, where her son had walked 18 steps. Isaiah thought about the record in the folder, and the careful, dismissive language. Of this background, the door that had stayed closed. He thought about the kitchen table at midnight, the legal pad, the 4 applications and the years between them, the service elevator, the corner office, and the envelope he had carried to Bernard's office and taken home again. He thought about what all of it had cost, and what all of it had made possible, and whether those two things could be separated. He had tried to answer that question before, and arrived at the same place, and they couldn't. And that was all right. He extended his hand. "Mrs. Webb," he said, "thank you for coming. We took good care of your son." She shook his hand. Her eyes were bright. "I know you did," she said. She left. Isaiah stood in the empty therapy room for a moment, and then he turned off the equipment he'd been checking, gathered his notes for the morning, and turned off the lights. He found Dominique in the hallway, leaning against the wall with her coat on, keys in her hand. "And I was wondering when you'd be done," she said. "You could have come in. You needed a minute." He looked at her. "Patricia Webb," he said. "I saw her arrive." A pause. "Are you all right?" He thought about it, and not the performed version of the answer, not the version that was designed to reassure, the honest version. "Yes," he said. "I think I actually am." She held out her hand. He took it, and they walked down the hallway together toward the exit, and she pushed open the door, and the March night came in. Cold and clear and full of the smell of the lake a few blocks east, and Chicago in the particular stillness that came after 10 on a weeknight, and the city not quiet, and never quiet, but lower, and like a frequency that had dropped into something more bearable, and they stood on the sidewalk outside the center. The sign above the door, Hargrove Carter Rehabilitation Center. He had stood outside a lot of buildings over the years. The apartment buildings of his childhood, the base housing during his service years, and the Englewood apartment where he'd brought Zara home from the hospital after their mother died and sat with her on the floor of the empty living room, because neither of them had been able to manage the furniture yet, and the Hargrove Tower service entrance at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night 3 years ago. This one had his name on it. He stood outside it and breathed the March air and felt the particular quality of being exactly where the work had led. Dominique stood beside him, and she was looking at the sign. "My father would have liked this building," she said. Why? Because it's for people, she said. Not for what people can produce. Just for people. And he looked at the sign. Yeah, he said. They stood there a little longer. Then she said, take me home. He flagged a cab. And they went home to the apartment they had moved into 6 months ago, and which was larger than his South Side place and smaller than her penthouse. And exactly right, because they had chosen it together on the basis of the kitchen, and which was large enough to eat in comfortably, and which Isaiah had informed Dominique was a non-negotiable. And she had said she could work with that. She had been right. Zara had left a light on in the kitchen, the way she did when she knew they were coming in late, a habit she'd carried from the Englewood apartment without either of them ever discussing it, and the light was on and there was a sticky note on the counter. Devante's mom came to find you after the ceremony. I watched from the hallway. You did good. Isaiah stood at the counter and read the note, and Dominique came to stand beside him and read it too. Neither of them said anything. He folded the note and put it in his pocket, and then he put his coat away and got 2 glasses of water, and they sat down at the kitchen table in the late-night quiet of a Thursday that had been many things, and the city was outside, and the work would be there in the morning, and everything else was exactly where it was supposed to be. And that was enough. It had always been enough. It was more than enough now.